Testing 1, 2, 3. You want me to, or would you like to? I just want to. Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, we just like to start. Diann? Yeah. Here's your microphone if you want to click on it. Yeah.
Adjust if you need.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Oh.
So that's working forward.
Forward, back.
Yeah.
Awesome. Point there, not at the screen, right?
Yeah. Although I think it'll work either way.
It does, I think.
Okay. My name is Tom Wilson, the Director of Interpretation. I want to welcome you to another Top Series Workplace. We've been having a fantastic year. It's been a lot of fun, and we're going to be going to improve these talks. Today, we're very proud to be presenting another talk. We've done a few talks on Robert Roberts, and Diann Strausberg is going to tell you all about it. Diann is a historian who's been working not exclusively on Robert Roberts, but a good deal of your work has been on Robert Roberts in the last 3 years, 4 years, yeah. And there seems to be more to uncover. So this one is Moments and Mysteries. So if you have seen Robert Roberts before, you're going to hear some new information that has been uncovered. We do these talks, we do concerts, we do teas, we've done a Regency Ball recently. We're trying to keep the place alive and lively in the wintertime. Reason to come out here and visit us. But you know, Gore Place is 1793 carriage house, the 1804 mansion, the 50 acres, the sheep, all of that really depended on the support of our friends and for come on in, folks. And our membership and our staff on our board. So we really appreciate you coming out to all of these events. If you want to see what else is coming up, we have a lot of wonderful things coming up in March. Jane Austen herself is going to be here. I don't know how they manage that, but I'm not going to ask. So you can go to goreplace.org, learn about Gore Place as an organization, and you see a full calendar of all of our events. And without further ado, we can join me in welcoming Diann Strausberg.
Here. Great to see you all here for this Robert Roberts program. What we're going to do today is it's Moments and Mysteries. We're going to kind of pick from the pot of new things that we've learned over the last few years. And I get to pick, which is fun. There'll be some, you probably know that there's not this great chest full of Robert Roberts archival material anywhere, right? If you know about it, let me know. But he's a kind of person, like most people, that didn't leave behind a great deal of information. Yet we're able to add pieces to the puzzle over time as we look more deeply into him. So I want to share some of the things that have come out of that. Some of it may be little data points, right, that help us to think about him in new ways. There are also a couple of big findings, I think, that I'm going to share with you today. And so it's kind of a mixture. Most of you, I think, know something about Robert Roberts, but in case you need a little refresher or you don't remember the sort of large arc of his story, I'll just go over that for a minute or two before we dive in. So he was born in South Carolina in 1780 in Charleston. Not much at all is known about the first 25 years of his life. That's one of the big mysteries. but we're learning a little bit more. By 1805, he's living in Boston as a free Black man, part of that community on Beacon Hill and the West End in Boston. He will come to Gore Place in 1825. We're coming up on the 200th anniversary of that in October, is when he goes to work for Gore. And 18 months later, he leaves as the author of the House Servants Directory, which is his book about how to be a servant, a manservant in an elite household. And he will go on also to do many other things in the second half of his life, especially in causes like abolition. And I think one of the things that I know took me a long time to realize about Robert Roberts was just who he was when he arrived at the door of Gore Place in 1825. He was 45 years old. His first wife had passed away. He'd been married for several years and 9 children to his second wife. He was a leader in the community in Boston. He was a deacon in the church. He owned property. He owned income property. So he was already, in addition to being a very accomplished manservant, he already had many other accomplishments in his life that were apart from domestic service by the time he gets here. And he does die in 1860. So one of the interesting things about him is the scope of his life. So both time and geographically. So he's born in the middle of the Revolution in Charleston, and he dies just days, I think, as he's being buried. His home state of South Carolina is voting to secede from the Union, and the Civil War will start just a few months later. And so if you can imagine all that he and his community and the country is going through in that time period, it's pretty remarkable. And also born in South Carolina, he tells us that he traveled and worked in France and England, and he comes north. So, I mean, many people were moving around the world in his day, but that's still something of a large scope of both geography and time. If you've come to learn the answer to the story of whether he was born free or not in Charleston, South Carolina, who his parents were, and how he got to Boston, I don't have the answer yet. And we may never know because of the nature of the information, but I do have some news, though. Some of the things that we're finding out help fill out the picture, help point us into a direction for more research, and are interesting to know. So this is Charleston, South Carolina. It was the largest seaport in the American colonies and the second largest slave society. Virginia was larger. And this is where he was born. Here's the middle of the Revolution. In 1780, Charleston was occupied by the British. They'd occupy it for 2 years. So you can imagine what kinds of things are going on there for the people that live there. And of course, slavery was all around him in his young years. And even though we can't say too much about his actual life, I think it's important to keep in mind that these two things are forces throughout his life. He and his community will base their claims to citizenship on the principles of the American founding, liberty and equality for all. And they really draw on that. And also, you can come north, but you can't escape slavery, especially if you're a Black person. There are many, many issues related to that in your life. So it's good to keep those things in mind. Now, we do know something from Robert Roberts about slavery in Charleston. This is David Lee Child. He was married to Maria. Maria, that was her name, Maria Child. You might have heard of her. He's a lawyer. And we're going ahead to the 1830s now. So Robert's already published his book, and he's no longer working at Gore Place. And he's very involved in the reform and abolitionist movements in Boston. And this man is doing a study on the tyranny of American slavery. He's documenting it. And so he interviews Roberts. Roberts gives him an affidavit, a signed legal affidavit about, he covers a number of things, including 2 stories about slave owners in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, he doesn't ever tell us that he was there. Right? But among all the stories that he told to Child, there are 2, one in particular that sound like they're like you're witnessing it, like he's witnessing it. And I think it would be very, there's a lot of reasons to believe that this tells us that he was in Charleston, South Carolina, and that he had knowledge of this particular thing that he talks about. And if that's true, that means that we know that he didn't leave there until he was at least 11 years old. So there's a new sort of piece of information that he was probably there and he may have witnessed. Now, I won't go into the story too much more because we could spend the whole time on like parsing out what's going on in the stories. Maybe we can do it at the end if you're interested. But he tells a story of what he calls of Captain Thomas Osborne, a very debauched slave owner who assaults and beats his enslaved women. And so that's quite a jarring story that he tells. So we're in Boston in 1805, and one of the great things, or at least that I've enjoyed and people seem to enjoy from this project, is we've been gathering some maps to try to help us understand Robert's life away from Waltham and Gore Place. And here is a map of Boston. You can probably recognize some things. I don't know if I have a little thing for you. Do I have a
Laser?
it's one of those?
Laser tag.
Let's see.
There you go.
Thank you so much.
Whoops.
Here on Barton Street. Buys property there. He also will own property on Joy Street, or was Belknap, which is probably, if you think about where he lived at all, you probably think about Belknap. Easy walk to work when he was going to work at Beacon Hill. Oh, so he's in Boston by 1805, but just like his first 25 years, there's kind of a gap where we don't know a lot about what he's doing until he buys property. He's in 1816, and he will buy 2 homes there within a couple of years of his renting there. So how did he get here? Well, most of you know the best guess speculation to date, how he got here. If you work in the place, of course, the sort of conjecture, Nathan Appleton. Nathan Appleton, a wealthy Boston merchant, and he and his brother both did make occasional trips to Charleston, South Carolina, as well as to England. And Robert tells us that he traveled with some of his employers to England and France. Uh, and I should say that when I got here 20 years ago, was a volunteer named doing extensive research into Robert Roberts, Susan Robertson's. And I think the first time anyone ever did any kind of deep diving into Roberts. So what we do today is built on a lot of that. And that Appleton was in Charleston, South Carolina a few times. It made sense, perhaps he somehow got Robert Roberts, was able to get him. I don't think it's true. There's no evidence to support it. And there's some reasons to think that it might not be true. And there were many ways, whether he was free or not, to get out of Charleston, South Carolina, without the help of a wealthy white merchant. But actually, I have another wealthy white merchant candidate too. The Amory family, in particular, gentleman, Thomas Amory, his base died in 18. There are Amorys are one of those families that they can name everybody the same over and over, and it's confusing. Name Amory. Thomas Amory is a very big merchant family. They ship all over the world, including South Carolina, even have offices in Charleston. But the reason and I should say, builds this house, you may recognize as the house, which the Gores owned for a while. Gore was governor. We're looking at it from the State House. That's up the street. But there's no Gore connection here at all in the story of how he might have got here. The key thing is Robert Roberts and his wife Sarah named their third son Thomas Amory Roberts. Coincidence? Just pulling a name out, it's a nice sounding name. By the way, and a typo. Oh, do you see that? It's a typo. So for a long time in the records, this young man was listed as Thomas Avery Roberts. And I can't even tell you how I got to, because some of the original records, like birth records and things like that, they say Amory. So this is a recent discovery that he was called Thomas Amory. So I don't have any evidence that he helped Roberts get here, but there's even more connection. So they named their son, that's in 1817, Thomas Amory. And then in 1819, when Roberts is buying that property on 2nd Street, Jonathan Amory, which is this man's brother and partner, is involved in some complex real estate deals that are going on that I haven't been able to untangle. And if you know any lawyers who understand real estate law in 1812, I'd love to know who they are because it would be helpful. But so the brother is helping him buy property. And then when Robert's late in his life, when he's making out his will, this man's son is made the executor of Robert's estate. And that man's name is Thomas C. Amory Jr. And maybe they were just hiring good legal help, the Roberts family. But in his will, he says that he is naming my friend, Thomas C. Amory Jr. as my executor. So it's just a lot of pieces of what might be a puzzle that helps us know. But even if this man did not help him come to Boston, it's still a pretty interesting relationship, right? And it is an example of how Robert seems to be able to work in the kind of network of the white elites in various ways, and to do it to his advantage. So it's an interesting side of his character. This wouldn't be the only time that he was doing something like that. So any votes? Do you think it's Mr. Amory or Mr. Appleton? Or it could be somebody else, which I think I have a, oh yes, I've developed another hypothesis. This is kind of for fun, but it's also educational, I think. One of the things I love about Roberts is it's actually really interesting not to be able to get a lot of answers, because he becomes this kind of prompt for like historical thinking, right? So you can get a certain number of clues together. You have to try to figure out what the other puzzle pieces look like, even though you can't quite come to an answer. Do you know what I mean? It's anyway, for certain people that like history puzzles, he makes for some good history puzzles. So there was a Captain Robert Roberts that lived in Boston, and he was a ship owner. Here you see a ship Mercury, and he made loops from Boston to Charleston to London. But Robert tells us that he did that. I know of no connection between them, except that ship captains were one way that if you were enslaved, you could escape from a port like Charleston, because many of them were sympathetic and they would take you on board and hide you. But what this really raises for me too is we can't be sure that Robert Roberts' name was Robert Roberts originally, especially if he was enslaved. Many slaves got rid of their slave names and took another name when they became free. And they would often take the name of someone that they admired for some reason, or who had helped them for some reason. So I have no idea, but this is a good example of another way he might have gotten out of South Carolina, and gives me reason to think, Bob Underwood and many people were hired, and I've tried too. We've all been searching for Robert Roberts in Charleston, South Carolina, and that may not have been his name. So, interesting. Talk about naming sons. Yes, finding clues wherever you can. So after it became clear that, Thomas Avery was Thomas Amory, and I knew a few of these. James Easton is Sarah Easton, the mother's father. Benjamin Franklin Roberts, we've all heard of Benjamin Franklin Roberts, right? An interesting choice of name. Again, just a nice name. But perhaps what you see, what I have found looking more closely at all of these names is that Roberts was very careful about who he named his children after. And they all say something about the kind of man he admired and principles that he lived by in his life. So James Easton, his father-in-law, was a Revolutionary War veteran, a son of slaves who had a school to teach iron making and blacksmithing to young men. So we've got the educational thread that's so important to Roberts, and the Revolutionary War thread. Benjamin Franklin Roberts. Benjamin Franklin was a very early abolitionist after being, I think, a slave owner. And then, of course, he brings out his kind of iconic autobiography, which is all about self-making, which is something Roberts is also about, if you think about some of the things he's talking about in his directory. So I'm not sure why he chose that name for his son, but he chooses, and we know about Thomas Amory. John Harris, I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. He is a frustrating person. I'll tell you a little bit more why. He's obviously a very good friend and business associate of Robert Roberts. And they come to Boston. They appear in Boston at almost the exact same time for the first time. And they're closely entwined through until his death, when he makes Roberts the executor of his will. So he seems to me like a key to those 25 missing years, right? Right. And I can't find out anything. He's as mysterious as Robert Roberts, if you try to go back before about 1805. So a very interesting thing. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute, but frustrating in some ways. Timothy's the only son that does not have a middle name. And I can't find any other Timothys, although there could be in Robert's or his wife's background. But Timothy in the Bible is I think it's proper to say the book, which deals a lot with the role of church deacon, which is Roberts was a church deacon at the church in where the African American Meeting House is today. He was a deacon there for many, many years. And that's one of the things he's known in his community as the Deacon Roberts. So that may be why. And then William Wilberforce, some of you may know that name, a great English abolitionist. And the boy was born within a few weeks of the death of William Wilberforce. So and some of these children are being named at a time when there's very little other evidence about what's going on in Robert Roberts' life. But I think we can say that, you know, he was at least thinking about things like abolition during this time period. All right, well, we're finally in Boston again. So this is Joy Street, was Belknap when Roberts lived there, the center of the free Black community. Roberts would have walked this street to work at Appleton's. It's a great spot. The community meets and has their political meetings and things in the church, which you can't see, but it's right around the corner. Here it is, the African American Meeting House. You've probably all been there. So Robert Roberts is a deacon there. And I think we knew that we definitely knew he was a member there from early on. But I also found that he had been, well, throughout his life, he's known as the deacon. And at the end of his life, someone talks about how respected he has been by his brethren as a deacon in the church. And he was also a delegate to the Baptist convention in Boston one year. He was sent as a delegate. So again, a leader in his church, right? Speaking of Joy Street or Belknap Street, here's one of the mysteries. Me puzzling over some math. I'm good at math, but what's going on here? So who is Harriet? In 1822, John Harris, remember him from a few minutes ago? He has purchased the Joy Street house that will eventually become Roberts. And in 1822, a single woman, Robert Roberts' daughter, Harriet, buys half of the house from Harris. Woman means you're of age or majority, and you've hit adulthood, but you've never been married. You're not divorced, you're not widowed, you've never been married. Now my problem again, if you can find that legal help for me. I can't figure out what the age of majority or adulthood, the age you could own property is during this time. It's somewhere between 16 and 21. So I was trying to figure out essentially when Harriet was born, because there's no known Harriet that is a daughter of Robert Roberts. And a little puzzling over the math is he marries his first wife in 1805. Is this a daughter of the first wife? Or is this before the first wife? Is this a daughter from the 25 years of mystery? And I don't know, but that's why I just want to know where she falls in terms of the wives, because it could open up a whole other. It's possible that it's a child of his first wife. They didn't have any as far as the records show. Maybe she was, if she comes into this time period. But if she doesn't, then he had another relationship, which makes sense. If you're 25-year-old guy back then, you probably did, but I don't really know. So it's mystery. I want to make a point that Roberts, even though his name doesn't come up sometimes in things like the Masonic Lodge or some of the other organizations and things that were going on in Boston in his community, I think that may be because he was out working as a domestic servant perhaps and couldn't be involved. I don't know. Or maybe he wasn't part of some of these groups, but his network of associates are people that are really leaders in all that is going on in the community. Just because that's Thomas Paul, the head of the church, very strong abolitionist. Man's name's Prince Saunders. He was a teacher at the school. He went to Dartmouth. This is Paul Cuffey, who you see here. He was leading an effort to open up a colony for free blacks, so they could escape from bad conditions in Boston, America. And he actually writes a letter to Robert Roberts and Prince Saunders as leaders of their community who might be able to help him help find people who wanted to go to Sierra Leone. So again, Roberts is right up there with the top echelon of leaders. And this is John Hilton, who's a very, another one of those very important leaders. And Roberts is neighbors with these people and does things with him. Now, but I want to look at some not famous, those are famous free black people in Boston, some not famous people that Roberts knew. So I think this is pretty fascinating. So Job Riggin, who died in 1839, this is his obituary. And how he connects to Roberts is his executor. I don't know the rest of the connection, except that this man is a laborer on the wharves. So this is going to become a theme pretty soon. Laborers on the wharves. So it's just interesting to see. Here's a man of color. He was raised in Georgia. That almost has to mean that he was enslaved in Georgia. And he came to Boston and he was able to make a comfortable estate. And now he needs Robert Roberts to be his executor. So we see Robert Roberts's associates here, the kind of people he's living with. And we also see him again as an important person, right? He's made an executor of this will. Here's our friend John Harris. This is his obituary. He's a stevedore. Again, working on the wharves. And John Harris and Robert Roberts own property together. Roberts is his executor. So a very close relationship between the two. So there's lots of opportunity. This is an aerial view. Robert Sluice over here somewhere. Lots of opportunity for working on the wharves. And next to domestic service, that kind of manual labor is the other main occupation of free Black men in Boston. Some were very few professionals. There were men who did like retail, clothing stores, things like that, barbers. Many people had one or two or three kind of occupations because of the uncertainty of your financial situation and jobs. And so working on the wars was one of those. Here's what it was like to be a stevedore in New York. It was very physical, hard labor, very dangerous. People were, men were crushed by, I don't know if I can see, like by big barrels of molasses and things like that. They would fall off. There's a lot of reports of people falling off the planks and drowning. So dangerous, hard work. Guess who Boston's oldest stevedore was? So I think we've known because going back to like Robert Underwood's work, there's an 1860 census in which Robert Roberts gives his profession as stevedore. He's at that time, he's 80 years old when he dies. So I know, and I know I've had conversations with Prentice, for instance, about this. We can't quite, how could you be a stevedore, after you're 40 years old? And how does that all work out? Is it true? Is it right? Well, I think if you were going to say, of all the things that Robert did in his life, which one was sort of his, I don't know if identity is the right word, but really his thing, I'd have to say it's being a stevedore. Because beginning at least as early as 1823, before he even comes to Gore Place, and he's still a domestic servant, time after time after time, he calls himself a stevedore. So on deeds, on in his will, Robert Roberts writing his will, stevedore. On wills that he is, or where he is an executor, he is called a stevedore. So he was a stevedore, undoubtedly. This is a wonder. This is a great piece of art. That's not Robert Roberts, of course, but this is like the body you had to have, I think, to be a stevedore, right? Maybe not always that great, but so how does an 80-year-old man be a stevedore? I'm not sure. He may have been in very good condition, but also I came across the fact that there were like head stevedores. So I think of it from what I've read as a contractor. So this would be a man who had, I think, good connections in the community, understood the workforce in the community, had connections to ship captains or merchants who were bringing in things. And it would be the job of this head stevedore to know that a ship was going to come in, it needed to be unloaded at a certain time, and he would hire a crew from the community and manage that crew. So I have no proof that that was what Roberts did, at least later in his life, but it seems like the perfect job for him, right? He's so well connected in the community with both the free Black population and also with some of the merchants. So that's my guess anyway, is that later in life, he may have been doing the job of a head stevedore. But there's no doubt that he calls himself a stevedore throughout most of his life, at least after 1823. Well, in this community, it's very well known, and a lot of work has been done on communities like this in the North. It's a time when free Blacks, even in a place that's as relatively good to live as Massachusetts, there's still prejudice and discrimination. Robert Roberts' son talks about how after being trained to be a shoemaker, he can't get an apprenticeship because the white shoemakers won't hire him. So it's that community is not really integrated socially or economically or politically into the larger white community. So it's known that they just started making their own churches, schools, fraternal organizations, debate societies, music groups. They were developing their own community within the larger community. And especially the more elite who had the opportunities that some of the poorer laborers didn't have to get involved in such things. They especially were very into this idea of developing a community. It came to be known as an uplift ideology, or sometimes it was called elevation, or even just improvement. But it was this idea that we should help ourselves, help our community, help our families, and improve. And they did that very well. There was another side to it, though. It wasn't just improving our lives. The idea that you see here was that there was this optimism that if they did this, the white society would understand that they were worthy, I guess, of being incorporated into the larger society. Very sad thing. But that was the idea at the time. It was very kind of optimistic, and I guess in the long run rather naive, because it didn't take long before it became clear that it was going to take a lot more than that. And actually, one of Robert's in-laws, a man named Hosea Easton, around the time that Robert's book is coming out, writes some wonderful, very wonderful, I guess they're intense and radical pieces saying, essentially, time to wake up. It's not our fault. It's the white people who are going to have to need to change their minds. So, but it's interesting to think about Robert Roberts' time as one of this kind of optimism, but sadly didn't work out. Here's Maria Stewart, an abolitionist who was one of Robert's neighbors. This is what she had to say. You see this sense of, oh, we just got to show them. There's been a misunderstanding, right? Misunderstanding. Well, so all that being said, I would argue, I do argue, that we should see Robert Roberts' House Servants Directory as an act of uplift activism or uplift reform. And, I can say more about that at another time, but it fits everything that these men who are following this uplift idea are saying. You should develop yourself morally, financially, develop skills so you can get good jobs. If you are a successful man in that community, it is your duty to bring along the younger generation of men, right? So what is Roberts doing with his House Servants Directory? He's teaching all of those things to young men, isn't he? And the one thing, when Roberts writes his House Servants Directory, he talks about, expecting to do good. And the good that he expected to do is two parts. He wanted to make a really good house servants manual that worked for the employers and the employees, and he pulled that off. But there's a second stream there. If you read it sometime from the point of view of a young, maybe black man, doesn't have to be, but a young man who's trying to learn this job, who maybe is oppressed, can't get work, all those things. And maybe it'll jump out at you, but Roberts is constantly saying, what's in it for the young man, right? What's in it? He will end many of his directions saying, if you do these things, I'm paraphrasing, you'll make your employer happy, but it's also going to do you some good. He even says you might get a reference for a job. You might be able to apply these skills elsewhere. You will be building your character, which is something that no one can take from you. Your character is your character. So there are a lot of reasons why I think it makes sense to look at this work that he did as part of this uplift reform movement that's going on. All right. Literary butlers. When I first found out what I'm going to tell you about, some of you may know it already. I think I was at Susan Robinson's door, you know, at dawn, waiting for her to come in because I was so shocked. So shocked. So Robert Roberts was greatly influenced by a man named Thomas Cosnet, by his book, Thomas Cosnet. Thomas Cosnet, a lot like Robert Roberts, only he's in England. He's been a butler in elite households. He's getting ready to retire, and he decides to write a book to help other young men learn to be butlers because it's been a good job, and Cosnet's going to retire. And he actually, for some reason, he kind of catches on in England, and he starts appearing in these like literary journals and stuff where they're kind of using him to, I don't know, make fun of various things. Some of it's a little, you know, obscure if you don't, because it's the old ways of writing about things. But he becomes known as the literary butler. Thomas Cosnet does. His book comes out first around the early 1820s. It goes through several editions. And unlike Robert, some of the editions he makes changes in, but he's very successful with his book. And he's, you know, gets this reputation as being the literary butler. Well, here is the title page and the first page of content from Cosnet's book. Can you see that very well? No? Well, that's not going to work. Well, how about over here? Does this look familiar? Yes. Yes. This is also, it's not quite as elaborate as Robert Roberts' content page or title page, but similar. Well, it turns out, go back to that. It turns out that Robert Roberts cut and paste a lot of his house servants directory from Thomas Cosnet. Yeah. I was reading it because it was an English servant's manual written by a servant, and I'm, wait a minute, I've heard this before. So, but, I mean, some of your favorite sort of rhetorical devices or quotes from the house servants directory were first in Cosnet. Now, he may have taken them from somewhere else as well. I don't know. He addresses his work to William and Joseph. He
Who does, Cosnet or Robert?
Cosnet, and Roberts addresses his to Joseph and David. However, first of all, this was very much the way you put together these kinds of books in Robert's time. Number two, what Roberts is trying to do is not, he's trying to give you the best of the best practices, not necessarily trying to invent something new. As a matter of fact, the idea is to Americanize English kind of upper class fashionable practices. And you'll even notice in Robert's title page, he says this is for families in the US. So he's translating the English to the American. But Roberts also does new and different things. What Roberts is, I think, most proud of in many ways is his receipts or his recipes in the back of the book. And he tells you that he had hundreds of these that he had tested out, and he's giving you the 105 that are the best. Posnet hardly says anything about the 50 recipes he has in the back of the book. So, Roberts is focusing on something a bit different. And I will be writing more about, actually the annotated version of the online version that we're annotating for the 200th anniversary. I'm going to mark so that you can, if you want to follow along, what's Posnet and what's Roberts. So on the one hand, kind of jarring to know that some of these things you thought were Robert's words were actually not his words, yet he is very actively putting together something that he wants to be the best, and that he has added a lot to from his own experience, and that he is Americanizing. Posnet is, I think his first edition was something like 500 pages long. By the fourth, he got it down to 300 and something. Roberts is only 179. So, Roberts is doing a lot of things with his creation. And one of the things that this lets us do is to see some really interesting things about Robert Roberts popping out on the pages where he makes changes to Posnet. So, for instance, primo bono. Remember that from where Robert says he likes to keep his forks and knives in primo bono condition because all the eyes of the guests will be on them. And it's a real measure of whether you're a good servant or not. Well, a lot of what he says is from Posnet, but he puts in primo bono. Isn't that great? Also, some of these phrases that he uses are his own. I love this one where he is about how you announce dinner. And he explains, do it this way, do it that way. And then Roberts adds with a graceful motion of your head. So he's far from just, borrowing somebody else's stuff, right? He's really thinking this through and adding his own touches. And then this one too, this is just great. We have to do little cut paper roses now, don't you think, in the drawing room? And one more. And this is, as I say here, this is really important. You see this idea running through not only what he says in the house servants directory, but his later writing in the fight for full citizenship and the end of slavery. This idea that he has an interesting sort of stoicism, would it be? Perhaps it's coming from his religious beliefs. Things may be bad, but they're going to get it in the long run, and you're going to be okay. Well, his book got rave reviews. This is something that I've not seen anybody else discuss where Robert Roberts is concerned. I'm happy to say we were able to find a number of reviews of his book when it came out, and they loved it. There's more which will be in some of the materials that we'll be producing, like for the online edition, but they loved the book. They thought it was everything that we know. He was a master of his profession. He got everything in the book that was necessary. Servants were going to understand him as a servant. And one of the things I really liked about him was that he was the ideal servant as far as attitude went, right? Um, he knew his duty and he was happy to do it. They're like, but he had the right attitude for a servant. It was kind of interesting because for Robert Roberts, all of that was just the role you performed when you were a servant, and it wasn't really him, but he could play the part. Well, that's the book. I just wanted to point out one or two other things before I wrap up about his life after the book. So as you know, he leaves service once the book is published. He goes back and continues with all of his business, and he becomes, for at least about a decade, I'd say, very active in things like the anti-colonization movement and the abolition movement. So some of those things he continues through life, but he sort of starts to fade by 1835 or so from at least the news about these things. But he does keep up he does appear a few times after that. And this is one of them, which we found in this research, mostly because a great book came out about the fight against the marriage law that came out in the 1700s that prohibited interracial marriage. So there's this idea that it's going to be repealed. And this is a great example. What you see here, I know you can't read it, but this is the petition that was taken to a meeting of the Free Black community in Boston, and over 200 people signed it. And this petitioning was one way you really got the word to officials and the government about your thinking. And this was the way that community worked a lot. If an issue came up, and sometimes Roberts was involved in this, they would get the community together, they would have community meetings, they would vote, they would come up with resolutions, they would vote on them and send them to the powers that be. And that's what's going on here. So we know Roberts in this case was not leading, but he signed it. And I don't know if you remember his signature on the initial slide. And we might go back and look at that for a minute. Beautiful writing. That in the initial slide, that was his signature on Christopher Gore's will, witnessing Christopher Gore's will. And of course, we've known about that for a long time. But I was able to have a person who knows something about handwriting in the 19th century tell me about it. Not like reading your poem kind of thing, but so she said a couple of interesting things about it. It's kind of untrained. If you would notice the way it stands out from all the other signatures. It's not slanted, the way it's written. Untrained, probably self-taught, but someone who is very concerned with doing a beautiful job with this signature. The letters are formed very carefully, although not traditionally. And you can kind of see him there knowing that this was an official document. People were going to see it. He wants to do his very best job on that signature. Now, this is about 20 years later. Maybe not quite 20. Very different signature. And his signature looks like this on a lot of deeds that he signed. I don't know if he was just being, I can write pretty nice if I really take my time, but my everyday handwriting, it looks pretty much like that. So was that it? Was that the difference? Or is this a sign of, he's aging. At this point, he's 63 years old. I don't really know, but. All right, I'm going to end with an advertisement. I want to say a word about advertisement. So his book we were able to find, I think I counted 300 advertisements for his house servants directory from about 1827 to 1837. That was the last one I found in 1837. It was advertised across many cities, sometimes by the publisher, usually by booksellers. Maine, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, Washington, D.C. Excerpts were published in newspapers in Virginia and Tennessee. So his book was getting around. And the last one that I found, the one I was going to show you here. The last advertisement that I found was in Charleston, South Carolina in 1827. That should say 37, sorry, 1837. And here he is being listed. You'll notice that I think is Cousin on here? No, this is another. There are a couple of other books on here that are becoming very popular, household manuals. By the way, we've often said, or I've seen it written, that Robert Roberts' book became the household manual standard for decades to come. I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of that, and it makes sense that it wouldn't have, but more on that another time. So here he is being advertised, and what is over here? Very tragic story of a young, apparently rather, I guess, intelligent young lady. A very sad story. You can read it if you want, but I don't know what you say about this. It's just striking, isn't it? That here he is, and here is what's going on in his hometown. One thing about it is that, and then I'll stop. His book, nowhere in his house servants directory does it make any reference to his racial background. People today read those facsimile editions and have no idea that Robert Roberts is a Black man unless they've heard about that somewhere else. None of the advertisements, none of the reviews mention it. Probably people didn't know. But why would they keep it out of the book? That's the question. Why would they keep it out of the book? I have two thoughts on that. One is it, in many ways, just wasn't relevant, right? The book is being sold as, this master servant explaining how to do the job. And so I don't think there was any real benefit to bringing in, his racial background as a selling point. But also, if the publishers were planning to sell it in the South, which it seems that they did, right? Virginia, DC, well, you didn't have to go. Connecticut, was it still a slave state in 1827? Might have been. It was sold in Connecticut. You didn't have to go to the South, really, to find a slave state. Many slaveholders would have greatly objected to a book being sold that demonstrated that a free Black man could be successful, intelligent, an author, and all of those things, because there was this racial ideology being developed to justify slavery by saying, we all know, right, that Black people innately couldn't do those kinds of things. And they didn't want any evidence coming into their slave territories to contradict that. So perhaps, I have no idea, perhaps that's why it was left out of the book. But I don't know, I'm pretty sure that if this was by, free Black man Robert Roberts, they might not have sold it, I don't know. But isn't that great? Here he is, back home, a success, being advertised in the hometown newspaper, and in spite of all of that. So I think, that's a little extra. We're probably out of time, so I think I will stop and questions if you have them. Yes.
Yeah, did you learn anything about Black home ownership in your research, other than books that got in Paris and Roberts?
Harris, yes. Yes, I do. There are statistics out there. So we can say for sure that Roberts was very unusual. He would be an elite person within his free Black world to own property. It wasn't even that common among white people to own property. So for Black men to own it, that was unusual. He died with an estate worth over $7,000. So that was definitely on the high end. Again, for probably any laboring person or servant, that was black or white. That was a good size. Someone called it a handsome. He had amassed a handsome property. You know, it wasn't Christopher Gore's level, but it was a handsome property. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah. And if you would like to learn about the community, there's a great book called, I think, Black Boston by Horton. Mr. and Mrs. Horton, I've forgotten their first names. It was written quite a long time ago, but it's still out there. It's very good. And there are others as well. Some newer ones that talk more about the fight for citizenship and things like that, but they give you a lot of that background. So he was unusual. He was unusual. And he would have been in the servant world. He would have been very high status person. So he had a lot of things that put him up on a kind of elite level.
One other thing, when we talk about Thomas Avery, and Roberts, I guess second Sunday name Thomas Avery Roberts.
Yes.
You didn't mention that Thomas Avery was Mrs. Gore's uncle.
Yes, that's right. And that's right. So that Mrs. Gore and the Amory family were she had Amory's. She came from Amory's. I don't think there was any. So some people have talked about how Roberts might have gotten his job here because Mrs. Gore knew people or something that he knew, kind of thing, because through the Amorys. But what I was talking about happened. I think would have happened before. I didn't see her being involved for some reason, which I'm not remembering right now, early on in that relationship. But later on, certainly they would have kind of all known each other. But yes, small world. What else? Yes. I am curious about if Charleston was the second largest state society at the time that Roberts was born. What are, like, I know we don't know for sure, what are the chances that he was born? That's a great question. So I'd just say a couple of things about that. There are a lot of ways you could have been a free man, a free black man from South Carolina. You could have been born free. You could have gotten your freedom at some point along the way. You could have been born to a free mother. Your slave status depended upon your mother's status. So there are a lot of ways that you could have been free without being a slave, and then somehow, or you could have escaped. Now, so, but the number of, I don't know, there was something like 8,000 enslaved people in in the state, I can't remember, but the percentage of free blacks compared to enslaved blacks in South Carolina, very small. I think there were only 500 free black people living in Charleston at his time. So it's very small. So I suppose it's a small chance, but there is a chance. If you wanted to, if you want my best guess, it's not even my best guess. It's what probably is the most common scenario, I think, that would explain Roberts, is that he was the son of a white enslaver, a white plantation master, and one of that man's enslaved women. Guys, I don't think I mentioned this. Roberts is often is mentioned in historical records as mulatto. So he came from a mixed race background. That's important to know. Again, there are different ways that can happen. You don't have to be the slave and slave master, but that would be most likely how you became a mulatto. And then this is interesting. Sometimes the fathers just sent them back into the cotton fields. You know, they didn't care. sometimes they had, if you've read about some of the like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and James Madison, they had fatherly feelings, I guess, for these children, not really surprising. And they would give them special privileges. They would educate them, give them certain educations, give them nicer positions within the household. And very commonly what they did, at least, was to assign them to be house servants instead of to be in the, the really awful conditions of field work. And wouldn't that be interesting? That might explain some of Robert Roberts' training. If he was they called them waiting boys or house boys as a young man in a Southern plantation house, he would have been learning some of these skills. So that would be like the most common scenario. Then he would either be freed by the master or he figured out some way to escape. Could be a whole different story, but that would sort of fit the like statistical average, I guess. Great question. If you ever find out, let me know. What's that?
I sleep at night.
How do I sleep at night?
Yeah, all these unanswered.
Oh, with the unanswered questions, I know. Well, they're fun, aren't they? But every once in a while, that's right, that's right. And that can be fun. It can also be frustrating, like with Mr. Harris. I just know he's the key to those missing 25 years, and yet I can't find it. But that's the way it is. But probably for a servant and for a free black man, they're probably more known about Roberts than most people who were in those categories, and yet there are just very large holes. I mean, it's true for a lot of people, but especially among, for obvious reasons like slavery, or very hard for Black people sometimes to trace their histories back. So.
Can you help me understand the combination of stevedore and servant? Because I think you said his records show he identified himself as a stevedore, certainly in 1823. In 1825, we know he was a manservant in Gore State. Is it possible that could he have had periods not overlapping, but could he have like worked as a stevedore for a number of years? And because he was 45, wasn't he, in 1925? And then somehow, I'm not quite sure, was skilled enough to be a manservant in a country estate. And I've done that for a while, and then, as you suggest, as an older man, stevedore. So was he really juggling the two jobs, do we think?
I think it wouldn't be unusual to be juggling multiple jobs if you were someone like him. I think it might be really hard to juggle a domestic servant, a manservant, to an elite Bostonian, and do something else. And if you were working for Christopher Gore, you were out here like 8 months of the year. So that would be hard. I mean, Robert says your time is not your own when you're a servant in a household like this. So I. Right. That's exactly right. So it's possible that he was first a domestic servant and then, got really good at that. And then he decided to, because he retires right after he writes the book and he never does domestic service again. Yeah, so good question. I don't know, but it wouldn't have been unusual for people to have these multiple jobs and work more than one job, or work, be a laborer sometimes and then be a servant at other times. But for this kind of job, I think you're right. It would be hard to overlap them.
Yeah. Have another job.
He might have had people working for him to do some of these other jobs. But maybe it was like he was a servant and then he started this side gig of, the stevedore trader thing, and then he felt he could go full time, right? Yes. No, I know that when, according to the letter that was written about his hiring, he had a contract with Appleton that was going to be up in October, but I don't know, that would have been no more than a year or two, I don't think. The contract, so I don't know, it's kind of, he also worked for Kurt Boot before Appleton, I think, so, but the dates I don't know. Don't know.
He was working for them at that time because it's known that he did spend some time.
Yeah,
It's all.
it's great to come up with these scenarios, and maybe we'll hit on one of them. There was, yeah, I mean, and these, elite people were moving, as you say. They were in France. Kirk Boot went back to London a lot, where his family was from, so it could have been any of them. Yeah, don't hit nothing. Amazingly quiet record for those years before 1805. Well, I'm happy to continue trying to answer any questions. Did I say at the beginning I didn't have all the answers? I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to continue talking. It looks like, we should wrap up if you're ready, but I'm happy to stay and talk. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for your interest. Don't forget, I'm looking for legal help for about 1812 if you come across any specialists. Real estate and and also the single woman. What was the age of a official single woman?
Yeah, I would have had no idea that women could have bought property out of single or otherwise.